Okay, our lecture today is on the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's one of the oldest and most moving stories in the history of human civilization. Before we discuss the story, themes, meaning, and significance of this epic, few words on the ancient peoples of Mesopotamia, the background of the epic, and on epic genre in general. We start by ancient people in Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia, roughly present-day Iraq and parts of northeast Syria, a name given by the Greeks to the land between the two rivers, Tigris and the Euphrates. بلاد ما بين النهرين دجلة والفرات. This part in ancient Mesopotamia was called by its own inhabitants the land of Sumer and Akkad. On the Euphrates lies Uruk, one of the oldest cities in the Near East. Gilgamesh was a Sumerian king of Uruk. The Sumerians were the earliest settlers in Mesopotamia. Their language cannot be affiliated to any language we know. They were the first inventors of writing cuneiform script. You'll find it on your fly sheet. Al-Khat al-Mismari in Arabic. They wrote on clay tablets, and they were urban people who lived in fortified cities. Their land was divided into small kingdoms. Together with the Sumerians lived another group, the Akkadians, named after their city, Akkad. Their language was different from that of the Sumerians, for they spoke a language which belonged to the same linguistic family as Arabic and Hebrew, called Semitic, al-Lughat al-Samiyya. The Akkadians came from a different cultural background than the Sumerians, and their peaceful cultural interaction in the area lasted for 1,000 years. The Akkadian rule was predominant in Mesopotamia in 2000 before Christ. Their language replaced the Sumerian language as both the official and the spoken language of the country. We come next to the background of the epic. The Epic of Gilgamesh was recited for nearly 3 millennia. Modern generation came to know about Gilgamesh only after the first cuneiform fragments of the story were excavated in 1853 at Nineveh, from the library of the last great Assyrian king, Ashur-banipal, who reigned in the 7th century before Christ. Almost 20 years elapsed before the clay tablets were deciphered by George Smith. He was the first one to read them at the British Museum. Before long, fragments of Gilgamesh were unearthed both at Nineveh and the other ancient cities. From the Sumerian king list, we do know there was a historical Gilgamesh. He reigned sometime between 3000 and 2500 before Christ in the city of Uruk near the Euphrates in what is now southern Iraq. Gilgamesh became, after his death, a hero of many tales. In these tales, he is given a semi-divine and superhuman feature. Several of these tales were fixed in writing in the Sumerian language. Later on, 5 came down to us as unconnected different stories about the same hero. 1,000 years after the hero's death, these tales were joined together into a literary whole written in Akkadian. The most standard version of the text is written on 12 clay tablets. The text of the standard version is partly destroyed and some passages remain obscure. The discovery of some 50 fragments of the epic in various sites of ancient Near East enable scholars to fill some of the gaps and to improve our understanding of the text. In 2011, a new tablet was discovered, Tablet 5, at Sulaymaniya Museum in Iraq. It dates back to the Neo-Babylonian period. After this brief introduction to the ancient people of Mesopotamia and the background of the epic, few words about epic genre in general. You're reading the Epic of Gilgamesh, so here we talk about what do we mean by epic genre. Epic poetry may first be defined as heroic poetry, a poetry which records the deeds of heroes. It is found in almost all great literature of the world. Epic poetry is often found when cultures are first structured or restructured. They are often associated with the early stage of a literary tradition. Secondly, epic poetry is often a poetry of celebration. It celebrates the early deeds of individuals or tribes or peoples or cities. The Epic of Gilgamesh, for example, might just as well be called the Epic of Uruk, for it celebrates the city almost as much as its famous king. Epic poetry is often patriotic in tone, between inverted commas, patriotic, proud of its ethnic identity. Thirdly, epic poetry is often backward-looking. It describes not contemporary events or reality, but looks back to a heroic past to days gone by. In Gilgamesh, we are told many times that this is a tale of long ago, a tale of ancestors and of a golden age. Epic poetry, therefore, is often an evocation of a great past, a recreation of a golden age of heroism and great human achievements. It describes what may be called a heroic history, one in which heroes are recognizably human beings with all their virtues and faults, but seem to be slightly bigger than ordinary men and women. Epic poetry is often said to be divinely inspired, a tale of long ago, as we said, where we are taken to a world of enchantment and super reality. Gilgamesh and the Odyssey, which you will also be reading this semester, constitute a journey of manhood, which through the use of various literary techniques transmit the values of their respective society. Both stories are narrative poems about an epic journey. They make use of a storytelling trick called flashback. Flashbacks help in making the story more interesting and help to draw the reader in the story. It is used to emphasize epithets, similes, and speeches. Repetition makes the imagination open to suggestion, which can lead to an interesting implication as to the meaning of the text. It suggests a certain kind of imagery. The imagery of the forest, as we're going to see in Gilgamesh, and his killing of Humbaba, it is where they validate their heroism and slay Humbaba. It's an imagery, all right. But why are we reading this epic today? How does Gilgamesh's quest for immortality concern us today? How does Gilgamesh's existential change affect the way we look at ourselves and our society? What is the absurd in life? What is individuality? How can a human, in the midst of all failure and losses, still reach contentment and be at peace? How can a human relate to himself and to others? What is heroism? In fact, there are many interpretations for the Epic of Gilgamesh: the psychoanalytical, the gender, the sociological, the mystical, etc. I'm going to adopt the, quote, existential, unquote, interpretation as presented by Rivka Harris, Stephen Mitchell, Benjamin R. Foster, and others. Some authors viewed the epic as an exploration of the fear of death, but there is much more to this ancient masterpiece, which calls our attention to its timeless teachings about humanity, and about life. In the words of Rex Roth, Classics Revisited, quote, "This is a story of spiritual adventure, of self-realization, the discovery of the meaning of personality, of a type that would never change down the 4,000-year-long history of human imagination," unquote. Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, is described at the beginning of the epic as a powerful king, 2/3 God and 1/3 man. He's endowed with human and superhuman qualities. He abuses his power in many ways. Quote, "Gilgamesh sounds the tocsin for his amusement. His arrogance has no bounds by day or night. No son is left with his father, for Gilgamesh takes them all, even the children. His lust leaves no virgin to her lover, neither the warrior's daughter, nor the wife of the noble. Yet, this is the shepherd of the city, wise, comely, and resolute," unquote, page 62 in your text. This is how the grandeur and heroism of Gilgamesh is presented at the beginning of the epic. He is the undefeatable king of Uruk. He's powerful, demanding, oppressive, highly sexual ruler who is 2/3 God and 1/3 man. His choices are guided by whim and impulse. He has experience, but he does not know real life. Gilgamesh puts old men to work and has to have intercourse with every young bride before she sleeps with her husband. His life is routine, without restriction or duty. He is the only free person in his kingdom, but is there freedom without responsibilities? He will soon discover that lack of restriction do not render freedom, and in the end, he cannot escape the, quote, existential, unquote, that define the human experience, such as the reality of mortality. Enkidu, so people started grumbling and saw the gods, they created his alter ego, Enkidu. So Enkidu was created as a solution to the problems brought on by Gilgamesh's extraordinary nature. He is sent on a mission from the gods who want things to get better in Europe. How does Enkidu, the wild man, fit into the dynamic growth of the hero? Enkidu, the one who was created, lives and wanders in nature. He is in a state of primitiveness. He is at home, living among other animals. He enjoys life with all its day-to-day excitements. He does not exploit the world around him, but he joins with it in a state of harmonious coexistence. While Gilgamesh appears civilized, Enkidu appears barbaric. While Gilgamesh is arrogant and desirous of subjugating others, Enkidu lives in unity with nature, eats, drinks, and sleeps with other animals. He frees animals from their traps, and he exhibits a sense of self-morality. Nature is his home. There is no sense of alienation. He is not conscious of his own being. He simply lives his own everydayness. A trapper sees him, tells his father, who sends him to Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh, as if he knew that Enkidu has to be tamed rather than captured, and the only way to civilize him is through the power of Eros. The harlot, so he told him to bring a harlot. The harlot will sleep with Gilgamesh and maybe he will lose his power. Let's see what's going to happen. The harlot Shamhat leads Enkidu to self-awareness of what is a human being. She facilitates Enkidu's socialization. She taught him to love, eat, drink, and dress, and introduced him to human intercourse as such. Enkidu could no more resume his former life. The animals avoided him. When he wanted to go back to the animals, they did not accept him. He became different, for he became more of a human. Through interaction with Shamhat, Enkidu gained self-consciousness, a human characteristic which makes him different than animals. In the words of the 20th century philosopher Martin Buber in his book I and Thou, quote, civilization should not be merely viewed by accomplishments in art, language, culture, but also in our ability to relate to others, unquote. Enkidu's intimacy with the woman cancels his intimacy with nature. He has been transformed. The sense of alienation that a human experience in the midst of the natural world has now become Enkidu's curse, as well. A sense of alienation develops as we satisfy our needs when we realize, as conscious humans, that there is something missing. The role of the woman here, the harlot, is to teach and to lead to civilization. Enkidu's break with his former life among wild animals is first achieved through sexual relations and is completed through learning the way of civilized life. Shamhat has the double role as a sexual creature and a maternal figure. Shamhat is named and given individuality and personhood. She taught Enkidu, as we said, how to love, to eat, and drink. She transformed him from one at home with nature and wild animals into a human being who can interact with others. All right. Now, then Shamhat told Enkidu, why do you remain here in nature? Let's go to Uruk. Let's go to civilization. So they went together there, and there what was Gilgamesh doing? Trying to sleep with a bride before her bridegroom. So Enkidu steps in and they fight together. So the world of Uruk is out of balance because of Gilgamesh's excesses. And Enkidu has been created to restore that balance. Enkidu wanted to defend the women and children as he used to defend animals, so he defied Gilgamesh. The fight between the two heroes is such that they came to know each other more. It seems that Enkidu's humanization is complete when in Uruk he kneels before Gilgamesh and acknowledges his kingship. The institution, which in Mesopotamia was a guarantee of a full human life. Enkidu can now become the friend of Gilgamesh, at the same time his equal. So they became friends. What will be the next step? Can Gilgamesh and Enkidu go on enjoying their relationship? What is the meaning of life that is based on merriment and pleasure? Soren Kierkegaard, in the 19th century, he's a Danish philosopher, distinguishes between three primary modes of life. You'll find it on your fly sheet: the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious. He seems to think that people should progress through these different modes of life in order to arrive at the religious mode of life, the leap of faith, which is the best of the three. In other words, you have the aesthetic, the ethical, and then the religious. This stage, the religious, which is mentioned in his book, Kierkegaard's book, Fear and Trembling, does not apply to Gilgamesh. It is applied later in monotheism with Augustine and other philosophers and Sufis. In his book, Either Or, Kierkegaard calls the pleasurable kind of life aesthetic. When you want pleasure all the time, when you want to enjoy your life, it's aesthetic. And this mode of existence generates boredom, and man will go on seeking other sources for pleasure. The aesthetic person, according to Kierkegaard, seeks satisfaction in things over which they have no control. Gilgamesh is anxious, and he needed something thrilling, dangerous. How about slaying the monster Humbaba? One has to note here that the inauthentic life is submerged in the external, in the day-to-day distractions, sorrow, anxiety, death, and the like. Killing Humbaba and inscribing his name on the trees is thrilling and may be a recompensation for Gilgamesh's anxiety and a step towards an encounter with the naked self. Not paying heed to Enkidu's reluctance, he journeys to the cedar forest in front of Enkidu and fulfills his decision. He kills Humbaba and then he defies the goddess Ishtar when she proposed marriage. Ishtar became angry. She was infuriated. And she asked her father, Ainu, to send the bull of heaven. Gilgamesh and Enkidu kill the bull of heaven, and the gods decide the death of Enkidu. Enkidu became sick, and he is now on his deathbed. He had a dream, and this dream is very important because it made Gilgamesh be awakened to himself. So, all right, his dream will have its effect on the destiny of Gilgamesh and on his awareness of the finality of life and the meaning of existence. The afterlife, as Enkidu described it in his dream, is a dark place where ordinary people and kings are the same. Afraid and terrified, Gilgamesh will start reflecting on the meaning of existence, pleasure, and the like as he exclaims, quote, "The dream is marvelous, but the terror is great," unquote. Gilgamesh is not going to forget the dream. He will treasure it to learn, change, and move to another stage in his conception of heroism and mode of existence. Enkidu died, and Gilgamesh could not comprehend that his soulmate is no more. He finds himself confronted with the absurd nature of this loss, and he realizes that the universe is indifferent to his suffering. There are no answers, no solace. He begins to question the meaning of life or its meaninglessness. Suddenly, death becomes an undeniable reality to him. There is no going back. What happened to Enkidu might also happen to him, he contemplates. He experiences a profound state of anxiety which is rooted in the realization that life is moving towards death. This anxiety leads to melancholy. Life is ruled by the shadow of loss, which is already a fact after the death of Enkidu. This is a prelude or beginning of change from the aesthetic and pleasurable to the ethical. He realized now that killing Humbaba, defying Ishtar, doing all these are not going to last, all right? There is something more important. He wants to inquire about how to achieve immortality and who was the one who defied death. He heard about a human being who became immortal, so he wants to go and see him. His name is Utnapishtim. So he started on his second journey. The first journey when he slew Humbaba, and this is the second journey. We're going to compare and contrast between the two journeys. So here, he now wants to find the immortal Utnapishtim, as we said. Gilgamesh passes through different stages in his journey. These stages are like steps leading him to find himself, his individuality. The 12 leagues of darkness that he passed through are symbolic, reflecting a soul in turmoil to reach the reality of existence. Reaching the garden of the sun, Shamash, lead him to Siduri, the woman of the wine. Shamash told him, "You're not going to attain immortal life," but he insisted he wanted to go on, and so he led him to Siduri, the woman of the wine. Wine is reality, it's pleasure, all right? So she is going now to advise him, and we're going to see how. Gilgamesh is still in a transitory period. Moving towards self-consciousness was still in the making, so he was infuriated when Siduri barred her gate. In other words, when Siduri saw him, she closed her gate. So Gilgamesh is did not change really now. He's still arrogant. And he told her, "Young woman, maker of wine, why do you bolt your door? What did you see that made you bar your gate? For I am Gilgamesh, who seized and killed the bull of heaven. I killed the watchman of the cedar forest. I overthrew Humbaba who lived in the forest, and I killed the lions in the passes of the mountain. Page 100, 101. See how arrogant he is? And Siduri brought him back to himself and his limits as a human. She said, quote, if you are that Gilgamesh, why are your cheeks so starved? And why is your face so drawn? Why is despair in your heart and your face like the face of one who has made a long journey? Yes, why is your face burned from heat and cold? And why do you come here wandering over the pastures in search of the wind? Page 101 in your text. Gilgamesh came back to himself to realize that he was not as strong and invulnerable as he once thought. So he answered, quote, it changed the tone. And why should not my heart be starved and my face drawn? Despair is in my heart, and my face is the face of one who has made a long journey. Unquote. He speaks about the death of Enkidu and that he wanted to look for Utnapishtim. Siduri assists Gilgamesh in his dangerous journey to find Utnapishtim after offering him a piece of advice. What she says here deserves special attention. Her discourse is realistic. She stresses the goodness of food, cleaning, clothing, and the importance of wife and child. She upholds the social norms of Mesopotamian society. A wise woman speaking in proverbial language. She says, Gilgamesh, where are you hurrying to? You will never find the life for which you are looking. When the gods created man, they allotted to him death, but life they retained in their keeping. As for you, Gilgamesh, fill your belly with good things, day and night, night and day. Dance and be merry, feast and rejoice. Let your clothes be fresh, bath yourself in water. Cherish the little child that holds your hand, and make your wife happy in your embrace, for this too is the lot of man. Unquote. Page 102 in your text. Siduri's advice is not only realistic and a simple call for pleasure, but is advising him to come to terms with death and life at the same time, to be realistic and to recognize his limits. Siduri guides him to Irshanabi, the ferry boat man, who will in turn take him to Utnapishtim, the only man who was immortal, who was granted immortality. Gilgamesh had questions to ask Utnapishtim. And Utnapishtim proved to him that he does not have the stuff of immortality. He challenged him to be awake for 7 days, but Gilgamesh failed the test. Utnapishtim then gave him his last chance. Listen here. He guided him to a magical plant that will restore him to youth. If you eat this plant, you remain young all your life. Gilgamesh plunges into the great deep, finds the plant, and brings it to the surface. He was so happy, he calls the plant, speaking to Irshanabi, the antidote to the fear of death. On his way back to Uruk, Gilgamesh baths in a pond, leaving the plant on the ground. What happened? A snake ate the plant. Her skin shone, and Gilgamesh helplessly lost his last chance. What will he do? Lose all hope? Continue searching anxiously? Or go back to build his city? Gilgamesh weeps for a while. Aware of himself and his limitations, he leaps to an ethical mode of existence where he realizes that he has to move on. As he discovers himself, his limitations, and his reality, he realizes that heroism is not in power, glory, and transient pleasure, but in wisdom and maturity. Killing Humbaba and the bull of heaven are all ephemeral episodes that have no permanence. What lasts is to find yourself in the midst of the absurdities of life. The mysteries of life seemed to open in front of his eyes as he addressed Irshanabi with the following words. He looked at Irshanabi and he told him, quote, I found a sign and now I have lost it. let us leave the boat on the bank and go, unquote. This is how they move on to Uruk. Gilgamesh started from his city, and he ended there. Upon reaching Great Uruk, Gilgamesh finds himself transformed by a profound sense of awakening. This is a personal existential change that enabled Gilgamesh to move to the ethical mode. True, he does not know the secret of immortality, but he discovered the majesty of his city. He realizes that work proper to man and to his destiny is to build, to create a world of his own, as well as to die. He wants to become a good king. The change in him is an inner change, an existential one. What matters most is commitment to others, which is ultimately the purpose of existence. He discovers that his existence is not only about his kingdom, his possessions, and his people, but also, and I quote Heidegger here, the possibilities that awaits his discovery. I conclude, Gilgamesh is a story about arrogance, humility, life, ethics, love, friendship, the absurd, the meaning of life, or its meaninglessness, and death. In the aesthetic stage, Gilgamesh was driven by immediate pleasure, power, and fame. Then he found himself caught in the grip of despair to discover that he has to live a life of commitment where meaning is sought not in one's own satisfaction, but in acknowledging the needs of others. This is how Gilgamesh moved to the ethical stage. From the self-indulging, self-centered, pleasure-seeking state of existence to despair, to a profound realization that brings him comfort, to societal regulations, the realization that he has a people to lead, to serve, and to satisfy. The image in which he finds contentment is not of him finding immortality, but discovering the beauty of his city and how it needs his wholehearted commitment. He is immortalized, he is immortal. As thousands of years later, we are still marveling at the messages embedded in his story. I am not trying to preach here. I am just conveying my understanding of Gilgamesh, the perplexed seeker and the wanderer who lives within all of us, who has a timeless message. The message he shares with us was brought forth in the midst of uncertainty and despair, when he had to learn how to accept limitations, possibilities, and inherent beauty, to rely on his naked self to grapple with the absurd. As Jean-Paul Sartre exclaimed in his book, quote, "No Exit," I'm quoting here, "Human life begins on the far side of despair." Thank you.